to make good use of it, and not just good use of it for one time. Because traditionally, we use stories one time. We hear the story once, and we forget it.
Yeah.
We tell the story once, and then put it away.
Mm-hmm.
But with the new thought on story-based ministry, we keep the stories. We process the story. We manufacture a lot new product out of the story and use it in our ministry, in our teaching, in our sermon. At the same time, we cultivate the skill, the involvement, the sense of belonging in the congregation. Anybody can be involved in a story-based ministry because everybody has story, number one. Number two, even if you don't want to share a story, everybody has the ability to hear the story. Every storyteller needs a listener. As long as you're a listener,
Boom, yeah.
and as long as you're listening to somebody's story, you're helping the person. If you raise questions to prompt the direction of the story, the depth or the width of the story, you're helping the person. If you start to interpret and show your whatever you learn, and you're stretching the story and make the story usable. Once you record the story becomes usable forever. It will reach to the end of the world through internet. And that's the big commission we have, right?
It is a big commission.
We have the big commission to say, go to the end of the world.
It's there
And we can do
forever.
it this way. But the big thing is, big additional benefit is, if we do it in a congregation, the congregation will build a good base, good legacy. We keep the story of the congregation. And the story can be shared. If we do it in the whole presbytery, that can be shared by other churches in the presbytery. Someday it will reach beyond the presbytery.
So when you say story, you mean like the history of the church?
It could be.
Do you mean the history
It could
of
be.
a person's life? Do you mean factual stories? Because Jesus tells parables in the
Yeah.
Gospels, and those are all made up.
Stories exist in many, many forms.
Yeah.
And in my thought, we don't have to restrict as we start. Perhaps after 5 years, we might want to concentrate. That's okay, because everybody can do it your own way. Right? But basically, the easiest way is to start with personal story, or community story, neighborhood story. Yeah. One of the value of the personal story is you capture the history of your environment at the same time. The history of the culture that you go through is possible. It becomes treasure to the community. You might say, well, when I was 10 years old, my neighbor had this store. And at the corner, there's another building. It's no longer here anymore, but that building looked this way, that way. You recall that history. So the values are many, many, many. So we cannot, really, it's up to us to use it. Yeah.
And are you thinking in a church setting, you want to kind of narrow what kind of story to tell?
Well, that's one of the challenge we met. If we want to start a story ministry, the way I start with anything. I don't mind. But you can say, I want to start with how we built the church, the construction. You might want to start with how do you get involved with the session. Any way you want, you feel comfortable. Any way the storyteller feel comfortable. And my recommendation is let it open. Because if I invite people to tell the story at their comfort level. If they don't want to talk about something, then we don't ask. someday they will. Someday they will. Based on what I learned this method in graduate school, and based on what I learned in the classroom, we run into a lot of resistance, but the resistance all go away sooner or later. As long as we have the right way to protect, the right way to coach, right way to guide, they'll go away. They'll feel good about being recorded or feel good about telling the story. And a lot of people agree that the way I tell the story, the content of my story depends on the listener.
That's true.
It depends on who is listening, who is asking question. You ask this kind of question, my story will go this way. You ask other question, the story will go the other way. The same happening can be told in many different ways, can form many stories. Some people might choose to tell the story as a fable. That's fine. That's a good way to protect privacy. Some people choose to tell in the third person form. Say, I know a guy who did this and that, and that's actually me, but I say, but we encourage that. We encourage that. We don't have to tell the real story. Even if it's something they make up, that's fine.
It's
Because
still a story.
every
Even if
fiction,
it's a real story or a made-up story. It's
every fiction, even the tale of the race between the hare and the turtle, actually happened.
I think there's truth in every story, even though every parable does not happen, but there's truth in every story.
Yeah.
It tells the truth.
Yeah.
The parable of the prodigal son, that's a story that tells us the truth
Every-
about Jesus, about God, but it may be a fictional story.
Every writers who make up stories, they have source of inspiration. Now it's okay for them to tell that kind of story. Last year I came up with a new method of counseling. Say, now we are in a counseling scenario. You want me to help you, but don't tell me the true story. You twist it any way you want. Number one. Number two, whatever you say, I won't take the whole thing as true and the only true. That way, I have no reason to spread the story because I don't believe it. But the catch is, even you tell me the wrong story, the false story, you still can get help from me because I'm not prescribing the detail of what you should do. Analyzing and thinking it through with you. You tell me you owe $10,000 to a bank. And I say, well, if you owe $10,000 to this bank, you have this scenario. If you owe $10,000 to your parents, that's a different story. If you actually owe $20,000, then scenario is this. I'll spread it out and cover more than what you tell me. And you have to think for yourself, say, now what do I do? I don't tell you the answer. So this is the tricky part. And this way, people feel safe. They don't have to tell you all the private things. And even if they tell you exactly 100% truth, I still can say, well, part of it is not true, so there's nobody for me to spread it. That's something I dream up. So in the story-based ministry, the purpose is not to investigate. It's not to find the truth, but to find the meaning of the story and how the story help the congregation, how the story help our faith. The story doesn't have to be true story. We use fable a lot, right?
And that's a good way to use it to interpret the Bible.
Yeah,
People argue regarding the Eden story.
yeah.
Well, don't look for the truth of the historical fact, look for the truth in the story, and
Yeah.
let the story come out.
Yeah. So that's the idea behind this.
Okay.
Okay, so with this kind of setting, people will feel more comfortable telling you the story. Possibly. If you ask them to tell me only the true story, don't waste my time. Say, go find somebody else. Right?
That's right.
Yeah. This is a little tricky part or technical part of the story ministry. And same thing, if I bring a story from my congregation and include it in my sermon, I might not want to point it out that it happens in our congregation, right? I might say, well, I heard somebody in California say something like this.